Good morning, everyone. I see we still have folks coming in and governors joining us. This is one of the sessions that I'm really most excited about because one of the things I hear from my fellow governors is what the hell is going on with the economy, with the world. Now, while I don't necessarily think that our two panelists will have every answer that we seek, they will certainly help elevate this discussion around what's happening economically with so much uncertainty. Some of it, of course, uncertainty of our own doing from the United States, but other uncertainty and ripples across the global economy. We're going to be hearing from leading economists, Dr. Jason Furman and Dr. Art Laffer, about the economic climate and what we should be looking for and expect when it comes to the future outlook. The economy is truly top of mind for us as governors. This is going to be a robust discussion. We are going to have presentations, plenty of opportunity for our governors to ask questions. There are so many variables and changes at the national and international level. Obviously, the tax bill that passed, locking in some of the tax cuts and preventing uncertainty around that, but enormous uncertainty around tax increases through tariffs, some of which have been applied, will be applied, are threatened to be applied. And of course, trade is a very important part of our economy. And of course, significantly also, interest rates, pressure on the Fed, where that's going. And of course, other things that I don't even know to ask that hopefully Dr. Furman and Dr. Laffer will address. In introducing them both, first, Dr. Arthur Laffer was a member of President Reagan's Economic Policy Advisory Board, and many consider him the author of Reaganomics. Named by Time magazine in 1999 as one of the century's greatest minds for famously inventing the Laffer curve on a napkin. His supply-side work has been lauded by members of both parties and as a major researcher and economic research and consulting firm. I also wanted everybody to know that he gave me my very first job when I was 13 or 14 years old. And he also gave the final toast at Marlin in my wedding a few years ago. So he has a special place in mine and my family's hearts. We're excited to welcome Dr. Laffer. Jason Furman, I got to work with professionally as the top economic advisor to President Obama. As he might recall, among many other things, we worked on the fast track for the free trade agreements that President Obama pioneered. Of course, Colombia, Panama. And then he didn't quite succeed in getting the Pacific Trade Agreement in place, but certainly worked hard on getting that done. My personal connection to Dr. Furman, in addition to, of course, following his work since leaving the White House as a leading economist at Harvard Kennedy School and Harvard University, is I have fond memories of his mother of blessed memory in the early 2000s, racing through the streets of New York with me in tow in her, in my memory, seems like a 90s Oldsmobile or one of those kind of classic cars just kind of going through, and who drives in New York? And there she was dodging in and out with me white-knuckling it in the passenger seat. So that might mean something of the childhood that Dr. Furman survived and perhaps the man he is today as a result of that experiences. Please join me in welcoming two of the premier economists in these United States, Dr. Arthur Laffer and Dr. Jason Furman. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Governor.
All right. Go ahead. We're going to have presentations from each of them, and then I have a few questions. I know our governors are never shy. So, Dr. Furman.
Great. Well, thank you, Governor Polis, for having me here in Colorado. Love this state. I'm here with my son, Felix, who has been promoted to governor temporarily, it looks like. Thank you, Governor Moore, for that promotion. Just had a few things to go through quickly. There's so much going on in the economy, so much uncertainty right now. It's going to be a big week the next week with tariffs supposed to go into effect on August 1st. Before that, a court case on July 31st about the tariffs, and who knows what else. Tariffs will be the first point here. The United States had a steady process of tariff reduction from the end of World War II up until about 2019. Then we saw the first term under President Trump, lots and lots of discussion of tariffs, but the average tariff rate only went up a little bit. It's that little blip you see there. Then you come to this year, and the tariff rate went up from 3% to 19%. We now have tariffs the likes of which we haven't seen since the 1930s. Moreover, it's not just the level of tariffs, it's the enormous amount of uncertainty. I wouldn't be surprised if we went up to a 30% average tariff. I wouldn't be surprised if we fell back to 12. Either way, much, much higher than we've had for a very, very long time. Now, some people say, people made all these apocalyptic predictions, but we've done these tariffs and the economy's just fine. Nothing's really happening. Well, let's look at the data and talk about what we think would happen and when it would happen. The blue bars here are the forecast for this year that were made in November. Growth was supposed to be around 2%. Last year, for context, it was 2.5%. It's supposed to be around 2%. It looks like in the first half of this year, and we're going to get the numbers next week, growth is actually going to be 1%. 1% is very slow. It's a market slowdown. Meanwhile, inflation, core inflation, excluding food and energy, was supposed to be falling back to the Fed's 2% target. Instead, it's about 2.9%. That is way above target. This chart shows you that the tariffs haven't been apocalyptic, and frankly, most economic models didn't say they would be apocalyptic, because trade is 10% of the American economy. But you take 1 percentage point off growth, that's quite a lot. It accumulates over time. You add 0.5 point to inflation, and by the way, more inflation is coming. That number is going to be above 3% by the end of the year. And this is the quandary the Fed is in. Those bars on the left say they want to cut rates to help the economy. The bars on the right says, if anything, they need to raise rates to slow inflation. And they're debating how much of that inflation is temporary versus permanent. Next big topic is debt. The debt went, again, big, long historical window here, went up above 100% of GDP when we were fighting World War II. We then spent the next 30 years getting that debt down as a share of GDP. It went up again a lot in the financial crisis, up again a lot in COVID. And the difference is, unlike World War II, those events are over, but the debt is continuing to rise. And I gave you just a sense. If interest rates are higher, it'll rise faster. If growth is higher, it'll rise slower. But almost under any assumptions you could write down, that debt is going to be rising as a share of the economy. Now, what does that mean? One thing it does is it's putting upward pressure on interest rates. This is the 10-year interest rate. It's back around 4.5%. That's what was pretty normal before the financial crisis, but we'd all gotten used to interest rates of 2 or 3%. With debt at the level we have, it's going to be very hard to get interest rates down very much from here. In fact, if anything, that debt should put upward pressure on interest rates. And when interest rates go up, it puts upward pressure on debt. And when debt goes up, it puts upward pressure on interest rates. That's the vicious cycle that we're going to potentially be in. Now, one important point is this is the 10-year. That's important for federal borrowing. This is what mortgages are based on, what business borrowing is based on. The Fed does not control the 10-year interest rate. The Fed just controls the Fed funds rate, which is the overnight interest rate between banks. And even if the Fed cuts the Fed funds rate, this interest rate might actually stay the same or go up. That would happen if you're worried about inflation in the future, or if you're worried about risk in the United States, something that threats to fire the head of the Fed, the chair of the Fed, exacerbate. So even if you fired the head of the Fed, even if you forced the next person to lower interest rates, you wouldn't actually lower this interest rate that I'm showing you here, which is the one that matters for the economy. Finally, let's just talk very briefly about the two big drivers of economic growth. The first driver of economic growth is people. People who work, people who contribute to the economy. And we are in a place now in the United States where the fertility rate is below 2, so that means we would have a shrinking population. Moreover, our population is aging. More people are reaching the retirement years and retiring than there are entering the pipeline. If we just relied on the native-born population for work here, we would have flat. Every month when you opened up the jobs numbers would basically be 0. We'd have an economy that looks like Japan. All of the growth in our labor force is coming from foreign-born workers. Now, you don't want millions and millions of people coming over the border illegally. You need border security, you need rule of law, but without immigrants, you're going to have a very hard time sustaining growth. Finally, productivity. When I look at the data so far, I'm not seeing AI in it. Productivity is basically right at the trend line it was on prior to COVID, but I'm certainly hopeful that we get maybe an extra half a point a year or something out of productivity growth. And the most important thing in our economy is probably what AI does and what it does to productivity growth. So that's just a quick once-over of a lot of these topics, and we can talk about all of them in more detail.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Dr. Furman. Thank you. Dr. Laffer. And you can either speak from your seat or up there. It's up to you. You're welcome to stay seated here. Yeah.
I'll do it up here, okay. But I'm the same height either way.
Oh.
That's not that funny, but.
If Dr. Laffer didn't make it as an economist, he would have been a great stand-up comedian.
I'm going to have a little fun if I can with the governors and the friends here in the audience. I'd like to, because coming here, I had an event at the airport in Nashville. I was there, and these two people were talking, and of course, I'm nosy. And so I was overhearing their conversation. The one guy was telling the first guy, he said, you know, did you hear about the Tennessee family? They got all their cousins, all their relatives all together. They packed up all their bags, and they moved to Illinois. And the second guy says, no, I didn't hear about that. And the first one looked back at him, and you never will. Sorry, Bill Lee is here, I'm hoping.
Yes, yeah.
Yes. It's fun. I also have one thing up on the slide there, just for edification for everyone here. This slide has two lines on it. The top one going from upper number down represents the total share of U.S. personal income by the 11 states that have adopted an income tax since 1960. That starts with West Virginia, it ended with Connecticut, it included Rhode Island and Maine and Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and it included Ohio, Indiana, Pennsylvania, I mentioned Michigan, Illinois, and also Nebraska. You see what's happening to the share of personal income by those states that adopted an income tax? And the bottom line, the blue one, is those 9 states that have no personal income tax and their share of the nation's total personal income. By the way, just that's sort of a fun thing to have as a background. Looking at the U.S. economy, I look at it from the standpoint of the 5 pillars of prosperity: taxation, government spending, monetary policy, regulatory policy, and trade policy. And when I look at it from that perspective, the BBB, as President Trump calls it, was really exceptionally important in that it kept a major tax increase from occurring. The highest marginal personal income tax rate would have gone from 37% to 39.6%. You would have had the death tax rise dramatically if the bill had not passed. Also, he had some other features there, but the expensing would have been gone as well. By getting that bill through, I think really saved the U.S. from a major downturn. It's preventing a major tax increase from occurring. There were some little tax cuts in there, like on tips and like on overtime and a couple of others on interest on car loans, et cetera. But the big thing of that bill was it kept the tax increase from occurring. And that's really important. If you look at the spending side, the tax bill is a continuation of a huge problem we have in the country of overspending and not having control over government spending. But when I look at that bill, it makes a very slight but modest improvement in the spending procedures. It does fund all the departments and agencies which are desperately necessary to have been funded. It does do that, but it also has a couple little things in there that I think are important, especially at the state level. It does have some features in the BBB that allows for school choice. It does have some features in there that allows for transparency. And as I'll mention a little bit later, I think transparency, medical transparency, is the single most important economic issue facing this country over the next 15, 20 years. Just forcing healthcare providers to provide transactions prices and to provide information as to what the effects of medical procedures are is really a big, big, big deal. And that's especially important at states where, if you look at states, the primary expenditures in states are for schools and for healthcare. Those are the lion's share of state operations, and the BBB will help states do that very well. If you get to monetary policy, I think with the president's chance of appointing a new Fed chairman shortly, I think that will be a very big plus for the country. I think to go back to a monetary policy, something like was done with Paul Volcker, where he followed interest rates, not led interest rates, where he had a price rule, I think is really important to get long-term price stability in the U.S. My candidate for that would be Kevin Warsh, and I think Jason likes Kevin very much too. He's just a hell of a good guy and would make a great Fed chairman. The fourth grand kingdom of macroeconomics is regulatory policy. With energy decontrol, you've already seen energy prices coming down, production going up. We have also a lot of other just deregulation. But again, the two big things in deregulation, the one is medical transparency is a huge, huge deal. And that would be extremely important for the health of the country. And it is about 17, 18% of GDP. And I have to tell you, one state put healthcare transparency in first, and that state was Colorado under the leadership of you, Jared. You also, by the way, I think you've cut the income tax.
We did.
I think you've cut property taxes.
We did, yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, you also cut sales taxes a little bit, didn't you?
We tried. Yeah, we tried to get there on that one.
I'll give you credit for a try. I mean, it's amazing there. This is where we are on that. The last one I want to get to is trade. And I will tell you about one conversation I had with the president a while ago. And I think this will tell you where at least I think trade issues are going. He called me, I don't know when it was, 2019. And he said, Arthur, I want you to know I'm a free trader. And I said, I know that, sir. I've been involved with you for a long, long time. He said, I run an international corporation. Every international corporation CEO is a free trader. And I made a joke I probably shouldn't have made. But I said, also, sir, you imported 2 foreign wives. Heck, you got to be a free trader. Just for the record, he did not laugh. I saw my lights flashing before my very eyes. But he said, how do I get these other countries? We gave them a lot of provisions of protectionism at the end of World War II. Japan, Germany, all these other countries, because they had been damaged by the war much more than the U.S. We allowed them all this sort of protection there. They've now grown, and those protections are still in there. And we are by far the freest large free trade nation in the world of large countries. And how do I bring them to the table to get them to negotiate free trade deals? And he said, the only thing is they don't care anything about the U.S. except they want our market. That's the only thing they really care about. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to threaten them with loss of the market, with tariffs of 50, 20, 100, 200%, to bring them to the table to negotiate fairer, better free trade deals with these countries. In his first term, President Trump had 5, I think, major trade agreements. The first one was USMCA, Mexico and Canada, which improved trade relations. It didn't make them worse. Now, it wasn't a big improvement, but it was an improvement in trade relations, a reduction of tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers. We then had one with Japan, which definitely was an improvement in trade. One with South Korea, again, another improvement of trade. Then we had one with Brazil and one with Colombia. Those were the 5 actual trade deals done in his first term. All 5 of them left us with a better trade relations, not less. I am watching the president right now. He scares the heck out of me. I am a wuss. I'm not a good negotiator. I'm not a tough guy. When I hear people threatening other people and I'll do this, I roll up in a fetal position. I start crying. I wet myself and I go under the bed. But Trump, for some reason, is not afraid. And he said, and what I've seen in the negotiations, and I've been down to Malay. I spent a week with Malay. I spent time with Bukala. Then I spent time in Indonesia. I was with the trade negotiators there in Indonesia. They all are very pleased with how the trade positions are going. My best guess is that we will have freer trade, not less free trade, when all of the smoke clears and the dust settles. Therefore, when I look at taxes, government spending, monetary policy, regulatory policy, and international policy, I see all 5 of the grand kingdoms of the U.S. economy going in the plus direction, going in the positive direction. I'm 85 years old, and I don't believe I've ever been more enthusiastic, more optimistic than I am today about the outlook for the United States. It spills over not only from economics. I am looking for very good, nice growth for a long period of time in the U.S. Not only of that, I also think with the U.S. being very strong and with a powerful president who is not afraid to get in and negotiate, I think we're going to have some good peace deals coming out of this. I'm hoping something happens in the Middle East. I know a couple of African conflicts have already been solved. I think the president really wants to do what Reagan did, was peace through strength. Come join us in getting prosperity, but if you don't, we've got the best military in the world to stop you. And that type of negotiation strength. And let me just say that I have never been more optimistic than I am today about the U.S. economy and the U.S. leadership in the next 20 years. Thank you.
Good. So we're gonna dive into a number of these topics, and I want to start with one that Dr. Furman raised, and that's people and population. And you hear, people on the right, J.D. Vance, Elon Musk, running around saying, "Have more kids, have more kids, have more kids," and it comes out of the same economic argument. I don't think any economist would disagree. If you have a 1.4, kids per couple, it's hard to have a growing economy. It's a problem that China faces. We're very close to that. However, immigration has really been our secret sauce. That's been where we get our people, we get our growth. And to both of you, and to Dr. Laffer, I want to say, what about that immigration drag on the economy that we're seeing with kind of the actions of ICE, the fact that it's drying up the supply of immigrants to our economy, both through reputation and by actual actions, both of those. To Dr. Furman, is there any merit, not necessarily to kind of the waving your arms around stuff you hear from the right, but other policies that can make having families more affordable, that can move the bar, free preschool, childcare, these kinds of things. I know a lot of countries have tried, limited success, but what can we do? Because one of the reasons, certainly I hear anecdotally, I'm sure our governors hear, that people have less kids is it's hard to afford to have kids. So are there things that government, states can do in that area? And what about this immigration drag on the economy? We can start with Dr. Laffer on immigration.
Yeah, I think I agree with Jason on the thing. We love immigration. Immigration's great for this country. In fact, it was founded on immigration, legal and illegal, and it was done in both ways. And prior to the last, let's say, 5 years, it was under reasonable control, and I don't think was leading to major difficulties. Is
that a drag you're worried about, though, with where they're going with really increasing ICE?
It's a different situation now after the last 4 years and the huge flood of immigrants coming in, and I don't think this event right now is undoing some of the damage done from the last 4 years, but I don't think this country is going to be without immigrants. I hope we have a very good immigration policy, bringing in high qualified, good labor to increase our output.
And I'll give you your glass half full version. Obviously, we're also you hope that we wind up at 0% tariffs, and that, I'd praise the president if he somehow achieves that. Same thing with this. If this achieves immigration reform and we actually get a legal way to do it, that's great. But I'm not optimistic.
Can I also say one thing?
Yeah.
Jason's a little bit higher than the 2.1% replacement value. He has 3 children. But I just want you to know I have 6 children, 14 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren.
You've done your part.
Let's go.
Dr. Furman, are there any levers states can? We all are interested in this. I share. I'm glad that Dr. Laffer's pro-immigrant. Your case makes a strong case for immigrants. But what about families and why they're having less kids? And are there any ideas you have for us about how we could change that side of the equation?
Yeah, and let me say one quick thing on immigration.
Please, go for it. Yes.
So immigration's 2 things. One is the labor force. We were getting about 3 million people a year a couple of years ago. Now this year probably be net 0 to 500,000. It's a big step down in growth. I'm not saying we should go back to the 3 million. A lot of that was disorderly. Need a better system for it. But then there's also the high-skilled part of it. And I talked about AI at the end of our talk. The race between China and the United States on AI, the biggest strength we have is that they can draw on the talents of 1.4 billion people. We, if we play our cards right, can draw on the talents of 8 billion people, anyone in the world who wants to locate here in the United States. And if we lose that, and by the way, certain ways we treat some of our universities, the way we're treating high-skilled immigration, all of that is risking it. In terms of children, there is a lot you can do to ensure that children are more successful in life. Some of those things may lead people to have more children. The evidence on that second channel is relatively weak, but the first set, what it does for the child's success, is more than good enough to justify it, and maybe we'll get lucky and people will have more children. Researchers in economics have been doing really, really cool things where they can find children that got something, and it could be moving to a better neighborhood. It could be better nutritional assistance. better health care, education, whatever it is. It's really amazing. All of them have pretty similar results. They then find that child 30 or 40 years later, and they're more likely to be working, less likely to be in prison, more likely to have better health status, and all of that. So the evidence is quite clear. A lot of this stuff even pays for itself over time. Maybe there's could call it a Laffer curve for these types of programs. I don't think as a governor you can take into account the tax revenue is going to go up 20 years from now when you spend money today. But in the back of your head, know that you're putting yourself in a much better position decades from now with almost anything you do for children.
Did you have a quick one?
Yeah, I would just respond, it's all prosperity. Now, you're talking about better schools, better neighborhoods, better things. It's all prosperity. If you get this economy growing and it's doing well, a lot of these problems will just disappear on their own. People will have good, high-paying jobs. Families will be able to do it. They'll be able to get better education. If you have schooling, school choice and all of this stuff and get it better, you will see miracles happen with population.
Well, I'm glad you both touted the education initiative we're doing through National Governors Association, Let's Get Ready, Educating All Americans for Success, because it is about numerator and denominator. It's about the number of people, but it's also about the economic contributions per person. So while I did say earlier it's hard to have economic growth while your population is going down, it's actually possible if you're getting more economic contributions from each person. It just gets harder and harder. Also, people have a tendency to get older. Except for Dr. Laffer, President Company Secretary.
Thank you.
Let me hit tariffs.
You got to watch this, Jerry.
Let me hit tariffs. Look, so Dr. Furman paints a scary picture, right? And clearly, trade's an important part of the economy. If we wind up with these tariffs that are like the Smoot-Hawley era, that are back in the 20s, 30s, and he showed the chart, there's already been a slight uptick, but this could be real. I mean, and I don't know if I could share Dr. Laffer's optimism. On the flip side, is this some master plan to get to zero and remove trade barriers? And then the final piece is, even if it is a master plan to get to free trade, this uncertainty has an effect on investment and planning. And you deal with the analytic side, I deal with the anecdotal side. I hear about a factory that was going to be built in Colorado, but because of uncertainty about the tariffs, they're going to build it in Mexico because they export to the global market and they source parts and materials globally, and they just don't know if they can do it here. It's a huge capital investment, and I'm sure there's many like that. So I'd like you both to address kind of that investment risk and secondary effects of tariffs. And then even if we somehow get to zero, and I'm sure what could gives you confidence we will, doesn't it lead to great uncertainty on the investment side? Dr. Furman?
So let's talk about the United Kingdom. They're like a perfectly nice country. They speak English. The United States has a trade surplus with them. Their tariffs against the United States averaged about 1 or 2%. We now have a 10% tariff against the United Kingdom. And that was after we reached an agreement with them. It just boggles the mind to try to understand where that came from. They weren't really doing anything to us. By the way, we could have gotten we had roughly 2% tariffs on them, they had roughly 2 on us. We could have gotten to 0-0 easily, could have reached that deal. They've wanted it for a while now, but now we're at 10% tariff on them. Europe, they have tariffs against us of about 2%. We have tariffs against them of about 2%. Now it varies. They have tariffs on our cars of 10, but they have tariffs on our light trucks, including SUVs, of 0. So they just vary. Some things are higher, some things are lower. We could reach a trade deal with Europe the same way we have these other ones. Instead, the president is in Scotland right now, and the good case scenario is that we end up with a 15% tariff. So with all respect, Dr. Laffer, I hear the president, and to me, sounds quite mercantilist. He thinks trade deficits are a sign that we're being ripped off by other countries. He misunderstands the protections that other countries have, doesn't realize they're really quite open to us. He sees the United States as being taken advantage of. And the very last thing I'd say in all of this is there's one country in the world that is doing all of the things that he thinks the UK is doing, and that's China. China really is not playing by the rules. China really is a national security threat. Our overdependence on China for lots of things is a big problem. Here's the problem. Of all the countries we're in a trade fight with, they have the most leverage. We're a useful customer for China. They like selling stuff to us, but it's sort of a nice to have for them. For us, their rare earths, for example, are a must-have. And so they have more leverage. The only way we can successfully confront China is not with our own country, which isn't large and powerful enough, but by getting together with others, with Europe, Japan, et cetera. And if we're waging a trade war in all these countries, we can't do what we should do, which is focus on the problem, and that problem is China.
Yeah, I hear all your arguments and I share all the fears. I don't think they're grounded in this case. I've been with Trump on these issues. He understands these issues. When you look at trade, you have to also look at non-tariff barriers. You have to look at domestic policies. For example, you get a VAT rebate if you're selling. There are just lots of things that go into the trade discussions. And when you look at Britain, they thought this was a good deal with the U.S. We thought it was a good deal. They did the deal. The markets have not collapsed before our very eyes. I think that the president is handling these trade negotiations quite well, but it should be integrated with the entire tax system of all the countries. And I'm quite optimistic that we're going to end up with a better, freer trade situation with Trump presidency than we would have not doing this. But I am afraid of mistakes. Don't ever for a moment think I don't worry about tariffs, and I don't think it could have the same horrible effects that they had in the Smoot-Hawley or in the Nixon. I was in the Nixon White House when we put the 10% import surcharge. We disallowed foreign capital from getting the investment tax credit. It was called the job development credit back then, and it led to a very nasty outcome in the late 70s. I've also been around. I've been going to the Oval Office now for 55 years. I've also been around when we had the Kennedy round tariff negotiation. Phenomenal prosperity follows. That was all reducing tariffs, leading to prosperity. I also was around when Reagan-Clinton NAFTA combination, which was also a very positive thing for the world. A lot of other things going on. So there's no disagreement here that we need freer trade, better trade, more balanced trade, less distortive trade. That's clear, at least to me. The question is, are we moving in that direction? I think we are.
So you're optimistic, but if
not only optimistic, I'm watching what's done.
But I mean, if the chart that Dr. Furman showed, and if those effective tariff rates do go much up, you do agree that would be a drag on the economy, right?
Well, if the tariffs by itself, yes, of course. But if you balance it with, let's say, rebating a VAT, I mean, there are all sorts of other things, all sorts of non-tariff barriers. For example, to get an American car authorized in Japan. Now, this is, as of 3 years ago, I did this number. You've got a road-ready car that's licensed to able to. If you sent that car to Japan, to get that car accepted as road-ready, it would cost you about $60,000 extra to do that for the non-tariff barriers. There are all of these things in there that are not shown by that chart. I mean, you've got to look at it in a holistic framework, and looking at holistically, I think we're moving very much in the right direction, although I'm scared to death, and Trump is never... the smoke never clears, the dust never settles. If something's not going, he blows something. I mean, it's like coming down in a riderless Calistoga wagon from the top of a mountain on a rocky road. You're going to be jolted all the way down. But the end result in the first term were 5 trade deals that were better than they had been before. And I think you're going to see the same thing come out here. And Trump is very, very well aware of the consequences of bad trade deals. He's heard you two guys. He's heard me, by the way. I lecture the same way you do, by the way. He's well aware of that. He understands these issues thoroughly. And he knows his powers to do negotiations. He knows the reciprocity, the flexibility he has with tariffs, which was never true before, the reciprocity there, and the negotiation situation. He's using tariffs to negotiate trade deals, but he's also using tariffs, et cetera, to negotiate peace treaties. This is a master negotiator who knows what he's doing in this and has staff that really is supporting him all the way. So I am very optimistic that this will come out quite nicely, but we'll have to wait and see. But I've got another 85 years, so I'm willing to wait.
Yeah, I agree with you on non-tariff barriers. That's why you want to do things like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which really comprehensively got rid of a lot of non-tariff barriers from Japan, Vietnam, Malaysia, 10 other countries. Unfortunately, President Trump walked away from that. On his negotiating skill, he caved to China. He caved pretty quickly to China. That, to me, looked like a sign of weakness. Moreover, even the most skilled negotiator, if you don't have a great hand, you can only get so much. The majority of countries in the world have the majority of their trade with China, not with the United States. If you went to countries around the world and gave them a choice, you can trade with the United States or you can trade with China, most of them would pick China, not the United States. We're 20% of the world's economy. What we have is an enormous strength that China does not have, though, is really strong alliances. Europe, Japan, Australia, Singapore, New Zealand, Canada, Mexico, et cetera, et cetera. Take that bloc as a whole and say, do you want to be part of that bloc or be part of the Chinese bloc? And every country, not every country, but most countries would pick that bloc. And so keeping all of that together is absolutely critical for China, because no master negotiator can do it on their own. One other thing I'd say about China is it's not just tariffs. We have to build and develop stuff here. That's what the CHIPS Act was about, building semiconductor plants here in the United States. That's what education and training is about. That's what immigration is about. I think we're going to need to do that on drones, not just on microchips. And you can't just do it with tariffs. You have to do it investing. And on some of these national security things, the market isn't going to do it all on its own. We need some government help.
Good. I want to get to two more topics quickly and then open it up. I want to get to tax policy and debt, and the two are obviously related as well. But on tax policy, there was a big bill passed. I don't think, and I want to ask, does it have any kind of new pro-growth aspects to it? I don't think either of you think necessarily tips or overtime changes are pro-growth tax cuts. They're obviously tax cuts. You do.
No, I think they're very pro-growth.
Would you rather cut the income tax rate or the corporate tax rate?
Yes, I would.
Okay.
But these are also pro-growth. You don't have to say one isn't, one is that. But
well, it's distortive to the labor market to tax different kinds of labor.
But you know, why would you tax tips when it costs you more to collect the money than the money you could collect? I mean, it makes no sense spending a lot more money getting something you're not going to get. The $1.25 she didn't report. Yeah, come on.
Well, it's privileging certain kinds of income over other kinds.
But you couldn't collect it anyway, Jared. And the other thing is, when you look at overtime, it's a marginal tax cut there. The one time you need a worker most is when it's overtime, when you've got a crisis, when you've got people in healthcare, whatever it is, and you need those guys to spend the time overtime. Getting that tax-free incentivizes them to be willing to do that there. So I think it makes a lot of sense doing the overtime one. Now, I would much rather see a low-rate, broad-based flat tax like the plan I did for Jerry Brown when he ran for president. We got rid of all federal taxes and had two flat-rate taxes, one on business net sales or value added, and one on personal unadjusted gross income. No deductions, no exemptions, no emissions, no credits, no exclusions, nothing. Those were the two, the 13% flat tax. We went from 8th in the race to 2nd in the race in the Democratic primary. That's what I'd love to see. I loved it when Reagan brought the rate down below 28%, and I want Trump to bring it down to below 28%, 25% is my dream goal, to get him to do that in this term, and I think there's a real good chance we can succeed. This is one step in a 4-year administration, and then goodness knows what happens, but we have a long way to go to get all the additional stuff, Jared, and I don't think this bill stopped a huge tax increase. Thank goodness it did that. Okay, now let's get on to the next one, and let's see if we can't, the three of us here, propose a plan that we all love, and let's get all the candidates go for it, okay? And I'd love to see one Democrat vote for one of these bills. Just one, like you did. I just was coming here, Jared, and the guy I worked for, Mike Madsen, who has ALS, he says, you tell that Governor Polis how much I love him and how proud I am for voting for the right to try bill. You know, thank you, Jared. That's the type of bipartisanship I'd love to see. And he really loves you for that vote, and he's, by the way, still alive.
We did a state version of that now as well.
I think it's just wonderful what you've done on that.
So, Dr. Furman, what's your take on what the tax provisions of the big bill, pro-growth, not pro-growth? What should we do if we care about growth? And then, as states, if we were, and you kind of alluded to this in your introduction, you said states with no income tax, but what should states be looking at as well? And some states like mine, and maybe you can both talk to this, we have this issue of kind of, are we coupled or not to the federal? And our state is mostly coupled, but we have on a few instances decoupled. And so kind of what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so first of all, in 2017, the tax law had two pieces. One was a largely revenue neutral corporate tax reform that took the top rate down from 35 to 21, to 21, and that was permanent. And then it had a bunch of stuff on the individual side that expired. The good pro-growth stuff was actually the permanent part. If you talk to the architects of that law, they actually think that the stuff that expired, part of why they set it up to expire, was they just didn't think it was as important to economic growth. That's what was just continued. We have a deficit that this year is nearly $2 trillion and is going to be going up from there. It's just madness to be in that position. No governor would be in anything resembling that position. If you wanted to come forward and do a draconian spending cut and then cut taxes, I disagree with it on values, but I couldn't tell you it was macroeconomic madness. Yeah. If you do the tax cut and you don't do the spending cut, or you do barely any spending cut on net, I think it's macroeconomic madness. I think it really is. And at some point, why do you tax? You tax for your spending. And we're spending at a level that we're going to need more taxes. So I think one big, beautiful bill just violated the Hippocratic Oath of do no harm by locking in that debt path.
I was very involved in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in its formulation and going through all of the provisions of it. Dropping the highest rate from 39.6 to 37 was very important. 100% expensing was really, it changes the total internal rate of return on investments. If you look at the death tax, which was hugely there, and as an older fellow who has grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and that's the reason I work every day, that's a really important stimulus as well. Now, on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, from the official numbers from the fourth quarter of 2017 through the third quarter of 2019, federal tax revenues rose by more over the last 2-year period than the last 2-year period did over the 2-year period before. Now, it is true.
Most of that was President Biden's inflation.
But the corporate tax rate reduction did lead to lower corporate tax revenues, but that's all been offset now, too. So now we have the corporate revenues flowing in. This thing has really worked. It brought down poverty rates, all that. Our growth disconnected from the Eurozone. We ended up in the 2-year period there, 2.5 percentage points higher growth than the Eurozone did. You know, it worked beautifully and it paid for itself in the first 2 years. So, you know, this is not irresponsible. Otherwise, we'd tax everyone at 150%. So every time you go to the office, instead of getting a check, you get a bill. My goodness, we'd balance the budget quickly now, wouldn't we? Come on. This is the perfect type of tax bill, was the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And the other taxes were done there very seriously. We just thought we needed the permanency on the one.
Not to get technical, I did like the business expensing, and I was glad to see that in the one big, beautiful bill. We agree on that. But look, you know, this bill is going to result in lower revenue and larger deficits. The Tax Foundation is a conservative think tank based in DC. They're very enthusiastic about tax cuts. They tend to find bigger growth effects than almost any other organization does. And they looked at it and said the growth would offset, I think, maybe 20% of the cost. Other groups looked at it and said the larger deficits are going to drive interest rates up. Look at that 4.5% 10-year we have. We have that because of our large budget deficits right now. That's not just tax cuts, by the way, and I was critical of a number of things President Biden did to increase the debt and the deficit. So everyone's played a role in this. But, you know, mortgage rates are high. Mortgage rates in some ways are like a tax on families. Businesses having a harder time accessing capital. It's more expensive now than it used to be. You think about the risks that you need to take to create a company like Tesla or SpaceX. It's a lot easier to do that when interest rates are low and you get profits 10, 15 years from now that'll count for something. If you can get 4.5 on treasuries, I don't know that I'd want to invest quite as much in speculative things. So across the board, there's just a lot of costs to these $2 trillion deficits that we have right now.
Your tax foundation found the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act would cost $1.5 trillion. By the way, it didn't. We paid for itself in the first 2 years. So the Tax Foundation is a very conservative organization in its supply side responses there. You know, I don't know what you're asking for, but you can't tax an economy into prosperity. Let me just tell you that. And a poor person can't spend himself into wealth. It just doesn't work that way. You know, if you have a set of money, and the question is, which would you rather do? give that money to people who don't work or to reduce the taxes on people who do work. And you know, there's nothing like pro-growth prosperity to provide the whole prosperity base for this society. You know, my view of this is that the most immoral act a government can ever perpetrate on its citizenry is to enact policies that have the effect of destroying the production base from which all benefits ultimately flow. You need a low-rate, broad-based, flat tax with no exemptions, exclusions, et cetera, just the way Jerry Brown proposed. And that's the ideal North Star. Anything that moves us in that direction is a positive. Anything that moves us away from that is a negative. That's my view of taxes. And it should be a flat rate. It shouldn't discriminate. The government should not be picking winners and losers. People who aren't dealt a good hand, Jason, as you said, you know, they have to learn to play with the hand they've got. Do the best we can to make it fair. But
I know our governors are never shy. Let's open it up to our governors. Dr. Green.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate the conversation. Could you comment on job growth during these eras? I mean, I'm hearing, just to be blunt, very different economic ideologies, and I appreciate it. But for instance, one of the governors put out an email blast yesterday saying 50 million jobs were created under Democratic presidents, 2 million of the jobs are created under Republican presidents. Could you reflect on that? And I assume the tax policies tracked in some ways with the ideologies of the parties.
Well, the strongest ideology ally I have was John F. Kennedy, who did the tax cuts, topped the highest rate from 91% to 70, lowered the lowest rate from 20% to 14. You know, he cut the corporate rate. By the way, the Republicans opposed all of that. In fact, they bullied him into not cutting the corporate tax enough. So, you know, it doesn't always hold there. In governors, it doesn't either. For example, in economic policies, you see a governor here who wants tax cuts as much as anyone. And it's not party-driven. And when you look at it, it's not always the thing. Now, for example, when Reagan came into office, he did pass the tax bill in 1981, but he phased in the tax cuts. The tax cuts did not actually occur until January 1st, 1983 is when they took hold. Guess when the recovery occurred? It is amazing to me how tax cuts don't work until they take effect, and then they work amazingly. So you can look at all of these numbers. I would recommend you look at my book, Taxes Have Consequences, which is a complete history of the U.S. income tax from 1913 to the present. You know, it's all database. We have every single tax return. We know what happens when every single time when we've raised the tax rate on the highest income earners. We know what's happened every single time we've lowered it. We go through every single period. Data, you know, opinions are worthless. You know, anecdotes are not data. You know, when you look at this isn't about opinions. I can imagine any sort of events happening. This is about what actually does happen. This is about facts, not how you feel. And when you look at this, every single time we've raised the highest tax rate on income earners in the U.S., 3 things have happened. The economy has underperformed, tax revenues from the top 1% have gone down, and the poor have been hammered. Every single time we've cut the highest tax rate on the top 1% of income earners, the economy has outperformed, tax revenues from the rich have gone up, and the poor have done well. It is very true that the rich do really well, too, when you cut tax rates. It's not anti-rich by any means, but it is pro-poor. And, you know, I'm going to go along with the old Kennedy line, you know, that no American is ever made better off by trying to pull a fellow American down. And we're all made better off whenever any one of us is made better off. And the line we used with Reagan and his campaign was, a rising tide, it raises all boats. We're all in this tub together. It's not one of us versus the other. We're all in the tub together. And poor people getting richer is wonderful. Rich people getting poorer is not wonderful. We all want to rise the tide there. So, I mean, when we go one against the other, and this type of discussion on taxing the rich is just not there. A low-rate, broad-based flat tax, and get the hell out of the way. And to let the people solve the problem. Minimal regulation, spending restraint.
Won't have time for a lot of questions, so I'll try to be as brief as possible. Governor, first of all, it is a fact that if you look at economic data and break it down by the party of the president, just about every variable has done better under Democrats than Republicans. GDP growth, investment, job growth, which you cited, and the stock market. As a Democrat, as much as I'd like to say I think that's definitely causal by Democrats, I think there's a bunch of things that are coincidences that show up there. For example, COVID hit during President Trump. That wiped out, 15 million jobs. That I don't think that was caused by a Republican ideology or something like that. So I think some of that's coincidence. I think at the very least, though, it tells us that the simple recipe and story we just heard isn't correct. President Kennedy, he cut taxes. We still had a 70% tax rate and a lot of economic growth with a 70% tax rate. I would not go back to 70%, but you can grow a lot with a 70% tax rate. President Clinton raised the rate to 39.6. We had a tremendous decade of economic growth. And by the way, people said the sky was going to fall. I mean, you look at what people said about the 1993 legislation. If you pass this, this will happen, the economy will crater. Economy boomed. So am I saying it boomed because of those tax increases? I don't think because of them. Did the deficit reduction from 1990 and 1993 help that economic boom? Absolutely. It brought interest rates down, stimulated business investment. The very last thing I'd say is look at the single biggest economic success the United States has ever had. Maybe not single biggest, anyway, one of the biggest is Silicon Valley in California. That didn't happen because of low taxes, didn't happen because of low regulation. That happened because of education and skill and innovativeness and the like. I'd love to get taxes, regulation, and education right, but frankly, if you asked me to pick one, I'd want the people that could make what we made in Silicon Valley, and even better would be to have all three.
Yes, Governor Moore.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the great conversation. I looked through, and I think for all of us as governors, we spend quite a bit of time going through all the implications of the big beautiful bill. And while not everything was wrong with the big beautiful bill. I agree. I think the adjustments on the business expenditures was smart. I think continuing the CTC, even though I might have thought differently about some of the rates and the adjustments to CTC was smart. I think some of the risk sharing platforms that happen with higher education was also smart. I also think that it did not address, in fact, actually made worse some of the things that I think are some of the biggest concerns that our larger economy has, and that is the debt. And also, it is the issue of how are we talking about this wealth gap? And I would actually completely agree. I think the answer to addressing the wealth gap is not to curb the high side, but it is to make sure you're putting in incentives to be able to lift up
Exactly.
the bottom. And I think some of the things we saw from the 2 years after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, where we saw things like housing supply cratered. Yeah. We saw things like GDP growth did not, had slowed. And so I guess my question is, what do you think it is going to take for this country to take seriously the fact that we have a debt, that we are now paying more on debt than we are on defense? And what is it going to take for this country to take seriously this idea that the wealth gap that we've continued to see, because one thing about the big beautiful bill, it is the largest upwards consolidation of wealth that our nation has ever seen. What is it going to take for the nation to take these two realities seriously? Because it does impact not just how we maneuver as governors, but also, frankly, how the country, what optionality the country has going forward as well.
Yeah, so Governor, first of all, one thing I think that I've heard you say before, and I agree with, and is there are some people in the Democratic Party that just don't like billionaires and wish they didn't exist and think they make the world a bad place. I at least disagree with that. I think you disagree with that. I would say Jeff Bezos, he made my life so much better. We have 3 Amazon packages showing up at our door every day. Or maybe that's making my life somewhat worse. And only one of them each day is for that guy over there. But you know what? I would have higher taxes on Jeff Bezos, not because I don't like him, not because I think I want to punish him or want him to disappear, but because I think he wouldn't really miss the money. And because I think he probably would have done all that, even with a slightly higher tax rate. And by the way, you can take that taxes and use it to do the investments in children that we were talking about that have an enormous, enormous rate of return. And so to have a tax system that's based not on punishment, but on expanding opportunity and what you do with the money, and that's where the big beautiful bill went in exactly the opposite direction. It also included all these cuts to Medicaid, which will result in 12 million uninsured. And by the way, it's hard for children to have great opportunities when their family is worried about health care.
I'll just add, if I can, to what you're saying, and I do agree with you totally. We have a real problem in the inner city in the U.S. And we have a poverty trap in that inner city that's really extremely.
By the way, and rural. I would add we have a rural poverty trap as well. Both. Yeah.
I'm just focused. In Philadelphia today, a single mother, and that this isn't today, it's 4 years ago that I did this work on the single mother, 2 children. She makes $29,000. If you take her income of $29,000 and subtract all the taxes she's supposed to pay at that, and you get her after-tax income, then you look at all the social welfare benefits she's eligible for with 2 dependent children. You get all those benefits there. You get a total amount of spending she has at $29,000 a year income. If this woman then shows a lot of gumption, push, drive, and studies late at night and works hard and raises her income from $29,000 to $58,000, doubles her income, and you go through the same calculation. You take the $58,000, you take out all the taxes, you get her after-tax income. Then you look at all the social welfare benefits she's eligible for, which have all gone away by the time she gets to 58. Her spending power is exactly the same at $58,000 a year income as it was at $29,000 a year. That's a 100% tax rate on her trying to come out of the poverty. If you look at it, I wrote something back in 1974. I tried to do it with my Democrat friends, Jerry Brown and some of the others. I couldn't, but I did get Jack Kemp and Ronald Reagan to do it. Enterprise zones. Why don't we take the inner cities and make them tax-free zones? Just for no payroll tax, either employer or employee for anyone who lives in the enterprise zone and who works in the enterprise zone. No income tax up to $50,000 a year income, either employer or employee for anyone who resides there. You know, get rid of the teenage minimum wage. These kids, you know, they aren't worth 15 bucks an hour in the marketplace. They're wonderful people, but they can't get jobs. After being unemployed for a year or two, they become unemployable. Then, after being unemployable, they can't get a job anywhere. And then after being employable for a while, they become hostile. You know, you need to get the roots going, the plants growing in inner cities. Get rid of building codes, regulations, restrictions, requirements. I mean, you try to start a business in the south side of Chicago, which is where I lived. I lived in Jackson Park Highlands, South Shore. In fact, the story is when I left to California, my old neighborhood was no longer integrated. If you look at it, you can do all sorts of things to allow endemic natural growth of these areas. None of these are being done. Yeah. And this is where you gotta go. That's the tax cut area. And it's killing us.
And I actually agree with a lot of what you also know, that some of the challenge that we have with the big beautiful bill is they actually ride counter to it. So for example, if you take the adjustments on the CTC, the adjustments on the CTC to go from 2,000 to 2,500, that just knocked 48% of black children out of eligibility. So I agree with a lot of what you're saying. You know, I also just think that when we think about the policy implications we're pulling together, how we get there matters, because you know, kind of going back to what Jason said, you know, and I agree, billionaires are not a policy failure, but the amount of people we have living in poverty in this country is.
Yeah.
If the 3 of us sit here right now, do the BBB, we'd agree on all the things we'd eliminate and we'd keep the things there. I think the 3 of us would just come through to the same answer.
Oh, I want to get one more gubernatorial question and give a wrap-up chance. Governor Plow, yes.
Thank you, gentlemen, for coming. My economic question is a little different, not the BQ Act. However, in the Pacific, where my friend from Hawaii are from, yesterday we had a pretty interesting engagement with Australian Ambassador Rudd. He made an observation which I thought interesting. For years now, China's president has been doing the Road Belt Initiative, and he has about maybe 7-10 years in his total control of China now. The question I have, comparing the U.S. GDP to China's GDP, in the next 4 or 5 years, should China try to take back Taiwan and the U.S. get involved? Since the Road and Belt Initiative has been going on, what is the situation of China's economy? Is it going to implode based on what they've been doing for quite a while?
Yeah.
Or if you can just shine from an economic point of view of both countries?
Yeah, I was the first American to go to China in 1970 with George Shultz and John Ehrlich from Air Force Two, and I went there with my arms crossed. I couldn't stand them. You know, they were horrible enemies, and then I fell in love with China. China has had an economic miracle from 1970 to the present. Unbelievable supply-side economics, free trade, tax cuts, and sound money. They outsourced it to the U.S. Xi has started to reverse all of those policies. My view is, looking at Xi and what he has done, he is reversing all of the very strong pro-growth policies his predecessors had. And I am not optimistic about China being a phenomenally progressive, strong growth country going forward. I don't see the economic advantage to China of trying to take over militarily Taiwan. I just don't see it as logical, but goodness knows I've been wrong many times in my life, so maybe not there. But I don't view China as a long-run huge threat to the U.S. I just don't. I do view them as a wonderful trading partner. They and the U.S. have all the things that would give us comparative advantage and huge gains from trade.
So I think I largely agree. China's economy right now is a little bit smaller than the United States', but they are more heavily in manufacturing and exporting. So that gets back to the point I made before, that they're the bigger trade partner of the majority of countries in the world. So in some sense, in global trade, they're more important than the United States, even though their economy is a little bit smaller than ours. If you go back to those two ingredients of economic growth, the first is people. China has a very severe demographic problem. Their working age population is already shrinking. It's going to start shrinking 1.5% to 2% a year. There's not much you can do about that. If you want a 25-year-old, one way of making them takes 25 years, and they're not making a lot of them right now. And the other way is immigrants, and they don't have that in China. Second thing is productivity growth, and here's what I think Dr. Laffer was talking about. For productivity growth, she's doing all the wrong things. He's taking the people that are successful innovators and threatening them with jail, disappearing them, and the like, and that's getting in the way of that too. So I don't think it's a collapse in China by any stretch, but just not anything resembling the growth they've enjoyed for the last 25 years.
Final question, because you both have to earn your keep as economists. We have many of our budget directors in the audience. For both of you, your best guess on economic growth and recession risk over the next 2 years?
Jason first.
I'd put it at 1.5% growth over the next 2 years, and a recession risk isn't particularly elevated above normal, but say on a 2-year horizon, 30%. That's normal, frankly, for 2 years. The bigger issue is inflation, which might be around 3%, and interest rates. I just would not budget on them coming down. I just wouldn't at this point.
And as I started off, I'm much more optimistic than that. I think it's going to be much better than that. And that's the last question, is it not? Because I was expecting one question from all of you. All of you so knowledgeable, and I'm just a fuzzy academic, sort of doing stuff. So I was prepared for someone to ask me what my stock picks were. No, I really was. So I spent a lot of time in the last week going through the new NYSE, the Americans, NASDAQ, picking stocks, and applying supply-side principles to it. And I found 5 stocks that I can guarantee you are going to triple in the next 6 months. Guaranteed. But Jared, no one asked.
With that, Dr. Furman and Dr. Laffer, let's give them a great round of applause.